Hi everyone, my name is David. As I've been introduced, I am the head of open source at BrowserStack. I am chair of a working group for the W3C, so I kind of I work on making sure that things are interoperable. So what works in Firefox will work in Safari and in Chrome, because it's important that kind of whatever device you're on, that you get a good experience where you are on the web. That is kind of my main belief. And with that, I've been working on WebDriver for many years, and I would like to kind of just take you through where I see WebDriver going in the future and beyond, because WebDriver has been around for well over a decade. It is used by all the top companies in the world, and it needs to evolve as the web evolves, because new technologies have been created all the time. Browsers are becoming more complex, like we've seen the rise of things like Chrome OS and Firefox OS. So browsers are essentially operating systems these days. So we need to kind of be aware of this. And so I'm going to go through a bit of the history of WebDriver, because I believe understanding the history can teach you the future. And then I will talk about the new protocol that we're going to be doing, the new APIs, and what benefits you're going to get. Also, possibly some of the downsides. So getting you to think about kind of these core problems as you go forward. And then hopefully we'll go into Q&A that you can kind of just ask me about different things, and I will try my best to get through as many questions as possible. So as I said, to understand we need to understand the past to understand the future, right? And so when WebDriver was created, its reason for being was that we had a whole bunch of browsers being created, and we needed to make sure that websites worked accordingly. And so kind of you needed to work in Firefox or Chrome, which, about 10, 12 years ago, that was the up and coming browser. Safari was still around, Internet Explorer. And so we needed to create a way that we would be able to kind of speak to different browsers without kind of causing a lot of work, because there's the Selenium and the WebDriver team is very small. I think there's only about a handful of core contributors, even to this day, who are kind of maintaining things and keeping things going. And so we needed to apply good engineering practices so that we could maximize the amount of impact that we could have with the least amount of engineers. So we looked around, we tried to see how we could do this. We were also getting requests from different people like, hey, we need to scale our tests. How do we do this? And so there was lots of these kind of things that kept coming up, and how could we improve it? And so when we first started, each binding, so if you worked in .NET, there's a .NET binding. If you worked in Python, Java, Ruby, JavaScript, so on. Well, actually not JavaScript back then. But you had to make sure that you could speak natively to each of the browsers. So for Firefox, it was easy. It was just an extension that we spoke to. But for things like Internet Explorer, we had to do some common programming. So for kind of the engineers, for people who aren't engineers in the audience, COM is the underlying framework that holds Windows together. And so you if you want to speak from one application to another, you kind of have to use the COM interfaces. Now, if you're working in .NET back then, or doing COM interface programming was easy, but if you came from Python or Ruby, or even Java was a little bit easier, but Python and Ruby, it was very hard and full of memory leaks, and so you would crash people's computers, and this is just not the way to do it. And you had to replicate this for every language. So kind of the Selenium project has 5 core languages that we support at the moment. And so that would mean 5 times as much work. So we decided, no, that's not not the way forward. And that's where the idea of the drivers came in. So like if you use Selenium, you have to download Gecko driver or Chrome driver nowadays. We used to kind of ship some of it with the Selenium project. But that's where the idea came from, is that we would do this. Unfortunately, the only way to make this scalable, so if you use Selenium Grid, which allows you to scale out, is that we had to think of ways that you could communicate across machines, across networks potentially, to do this. And so we looked around and we knew that every language had good support for HTTP. Like it's one of the core things whenever a language is created, that there will always be like good support for HTTP, because that's how people generally work these days. And so we built this in and we started improving it, and the JSON wire protocol was created. And so this was kind of early days when JSON wasn't as widely used. And it led to kind of the good and the bad of WebDriver, right? It was easy to create new clients, right? So if you've worked in PHP, you will notice that there's like at least 10 Selenium clients. JavaScript, I think kind of there must be 10 to 20. And so like people were able to build it. They felt confident they could do this. We were able to build very good distributed infrastructure. So I work at BrowserStack. It's a Selenium as an infrastructure product. One of its products is Selenium as infrastructure, so you can scale out. So if you wanted to run 1,000 Selenium tests in parallel at once, we'd be able to handle that for you. And so kind of it's easy to build these things out. Once you kind of have the ability, once you understand how scaling out systems works, you could do it really well. And we had very good browser support, and we still do have very good browser support. The bad, as the web has grown, is that it's not event driven. So kind of when we started, a lot of people didn't really understand AJAX or asynchronous JavaScript. They kind of just wanted to test their web page, and they wanted, and like as testers, or kind of most humans, we think very synchronously. So like do step 1, then step 2, then step 3, and move on. And so that's how Selenium tests are generally written. But it kind of, there are times where you want to go, hey, just let me know when this event happens in the browser. So kind of, there's always this little thing in the background of a browser just kind of spinning around, and it'll like, whenever there's a bit of work, it'll kind of go, oh, I've done this work, and notify people. And we didn't offer any access to the internals of the browser. So kind of like, if you wanted to access the network stack, so you wanted to like say, pretend that you're on a slower network, or you're on kind of, you just wanted to say, whenever you get this HTTP call, just ignore it for me, because like it's my CDN or it's my analytics tracker. We don't really need that in our testing. So just kind of block those ones out. Selenium didn't have that. It was kind of like, here is a browser, and now we're going to emulate a user with that browser. But Selenium and the world needs to move on. And so we're coming up to the future, and we're kind of going really fast, well, as fast as we can with a small team, but we're going to the future that kind of we think people need and want, and where they want to be in the world. So we've been designing a new protocol. We call it WebDriver BiDi, and this stands for bidirectional communication. It's a protocol that's being designed for automation first. So if you have automators, if you're an automator, or kind of you work very closely with your engineering team, and they use tools like Puppeteer, a lot of that is sitting on top of a protocol called the Chrome debug protocol. which is okay. But it's designed for debuggers. It's kind of like the testing aspect of that has just been haphazardly put on top by accident. Someone wanted to just prove that it could work. And for the most part, it does an okay job, but it's very Chrome specific or Chromium base specific. It might not work very well with Opera or Brave or kind of Edge. I know those teams generally try and make sure it does, but kind of they're always having to kind of catch up with the Chromium team. And so, like, we can't just swap things in and out. We kind of got to think about how you as testers or kind of you as software engineers go about testing your software. And so the other thing is that we're designing it to allow people to migrate from kind of what their WebDriver tests look like today, making sure that their tests can be migrated across, because we all know like it's one of these unalienable facts that testing departments or testing teams tend to be kind of the most under-resourced or understaffed groups, right? And so they don't generally have enough time, money, effort to be able to kind of rewrite whole swathes of their test suites. And plus, people don't necessarily want to be doing that, right? Like once you've written a test, especially an automation test, it should be paying forward constantly. It should be useful. It should be doing things like that. And so it's been designed to allow people to migrate from their original WebDriver. And the other thing is that where other frameworks have learned from us in the past as a Selenium project and WebDriver, we're learning from them. We're seeing all the kind of mistakes that they're doing, well, not necessarily caused by them, but we're learning from them because kind of where they are powerful, Selenium might be weak, but where Selenium is very powerful, they might be weak. And I think kind of a more collaborative workflow and a work ethic in this area is far better for end users to be able to kind of get the best out of their products, right? Because our belief is that a rising tide lifts all ships. So whatever we can do as kind of the WebDriver project to improve testing across the web, even if it kind of improves other frameworks and other tools, it's worth it because it improves the web and kind of it makes people's lives easier. So I'm going to talk about some of the use cases that we've been working on and some of the benefits that we can see. So the first use case that generally pops to mind with things like this is that people are running their tests and they want to know if there are JavaScript errors occurring on the page. Remember when I said earlier that like Selenium didn't have any access to the browser internals? Now, getting that type of information is actually accessing something in the browser internals. Your end users will never be able to drive that or kind of be able to use that product, right? That part of your product. Because that's a developer tool. That's what developers need or testers need. They need to know that JavaScript is failing. And so one of the key features, and this, if you're kind of a WebDriver user, you can start using it now with the Selenium 4 beta that came out about 3-4 weeks ago. You'll be able to start using this now. Be able to kind of go, hey, whenever there's a JavaScript error, notify me, give me that like event, like send a message back. because we connect to the browser and we allow back and forth communication rather than the old way with Selenium, which was a, hey, could you do this thing? And then it will give you a response. Now you can send messages from the browser to your tests straight away. And I think this is a really, really big use case that I think a lot of people have been wanting for years. And for technological reasons, the Selenium project has not been able to offer it. It's not that we didn't want to do it, it's just that we couldn't necessarily do it. And then on top of kind of Java, sometimes people just want to know that, like, if there are certain console messages being come out. So like, if you're having any, like, because console has a raft of very good APIs, and so it's kind of thinking in the terms of logging APIs. You'll have your info, your kind of warnings and errors. You can now say, hey, whenever there's a console error or a console warning, let me know. This, again, like the JavaScript errors, you can grow your test suite to kind of catch these like small build issues. Like your JavaScript might work on your local machine, but once you minify it and obfuscate it, it suddenly stops working. Like, is there a problem in your build steps? Like, or is a certain file not being put into that one large JavaScript that you ship to your end users? You'll be able to catch those now. The other one, and this is kind of very kind of prevalent, I find, for a lot of software engineers, is that like your test environments tend to be slightly hidden from the internet where possible. And a lot of times people will put like basic authentication. So whenever you hit your test environment, it'll say, please log in on kind of like a little pop down from the browser. This can now be got around, like just like in the same way that Selenium for many years, and still does, allows people to get around self-signed certificates, because kind of people couldn't afford, or back then people couldn't afford self-signed certificates. Nowadays they're pretty much free thanks to the Let's Encrypt project. But it allows people to build this out and kind of improve things. The next one, and I'm sure everyone in this conference who's written an automated test, and I know Karina kind of was talking about it yesterday in a fantastic talk, was around flakiness of tests. Who's got a flaky test, right? Like, everyone has one. And Selenium has had very good libraries that allow people to wait for certain things to happen. But again, it's this command response. It's there and back before it can happen. And sometimes you just want to go, whenever this change happens in the browser, so, you know, does the, like, I need to click a button and I need to wait for something to happen. And I know visually when I'm looking at it, that button's changed red. And the way it's changed red, it kind of, when you look at the HTML on the page, is that there might be a new CSS class, or then it might have like added a new attribute. Hopefully some of these new APIs will allow people to kind of not have to write weird and wonderful waits for their code to work. They'll be able to say, let me know when there are changes or mutations on the page, and so that I can kind of log them and I can carry on with my test. Those improvements kind of slowly but surely build out to kind of a very good test suite, and kind of allows you to grow. And then we're going to carry on down this road. Like, this is just the start of our APIs. We're trying to build these out use case by use case so that we can improve it, rather than kind of just doing stuff because we think that's what users want. We're trying to actually create meaningful use case, and the benefits always come back to the user in a meaningful way. They can do things that they couldn't do in the past. Unfortunately, with every good design, there are always problems. Always trying to work through some of the kind of hard to do use cases. And we need to improve those wherever we can. But one of the main problems that tends to happen is, and it's something I know I'm working with colleagues at BrowserStack, is that if you start kind of asking for events, how do you make sure that me as a kind of like test provider, you know, giving you all the infrastructure, doesn't by accident create a denial of service on your test infrastructure? So kind of whenever I talk to people about scaling up their test, running tests in parallel, first things that you need to do is make sure that you've got very good atomic tests. So kind of your tests can run by themselves and they don't interact with anything else. The other thing, like once you've gone through kind of good test hygiene, is making sure that you actually have the infrastructure to run things in parallel, right? Being able to kind of run 1,000 tests in parallel, for example, against a website, means that you're creating 1,000 users doing something at once. I've seen people in the past using Raspberry Pis as their test infrastructure and then not understanding why things are not working properly. And so when we get down to kind of sending back events, if people are not careful, and this is something that we're trying to kind of make sure that we can create good defaults for the Selenium, for those who use Selenium and WebDriver, that you don't do a denial of service. That would be the worst thing that could ever happen, because suddenly people start wondering, like, are they being hacked, or kind of have they upset someone, and it's just a case of someone ran the tests and didn't realize. There's that. There are bound to be other problems, like the way that Selenium worked and was able to scale is that it used HTTP calls, and HTTP is very resilient, and so like if a call fails, it can kind of just redo it. To be able to do the bidirectional communication, it means we have to have an open socket between 2 points, constantly open. And as I kind of tell my engineers and kind of my interns and things like that, the internet is down until it is up, right? There are more cases where things are going down, and which is why TCP, the underlying protocol for the network stack that most people use, is so resilient. Why it does kind of these multiple, like, are you there? Yes, I'm there. Thank you for letting me know you're there. And then kind of it goes and does things, right? So like we need to think how WebSockets, because we're using WebSockets now, can handle that. How these can handle long distances. So kind of, if you're using AWS, like how close is your test machine to your AWS system? Or if you're using BrowserStack, like like we have data centers around the world to kind of keep the distance between machines and people very small. But like, how does that impact things? How do we do that? So kind of, this is the future that we're trying to, these are the problems that we're trying to fix, and hopefully we will, or kind of at least allow people to know how to fix them themselves. But yeah, so kind of, I don't think problems necessarily need to be seen as problems. Problems can be seen as opportunities. Opportunities to improve, opportunities to grow, and improve your product and do things better. And it means that at the end of the day, your tests will be better, and that you, as kind of quality engineers and developers, can get the best out of your kind of good products. So next steps is that, the next steps is that we will be specifying this. If you go, there is a specification in the works that I'm kind of helping facilitate between Mozilla, Google, Apple, and a few others to make sure that we can kind of get this into every browser. We're taking some of the lessons that we learned from like the Chrome debug protocol, Mozilla's remote debug protocol, kind of how those work and kind of work across networks, and what we've learned in Selenium, and trying to build this out so that we can do this. And so I know that this is already being worked on by kind of the main browser vendors, like Microsoft. They're implementing it into Chrome as part of their work into Edge. Mozilla are doing it, and the Safari folks are doing it as well. So kind of it's already being done, but at the moment it's using Selenium's kind of doing a bit of magic to make it work between Chromium-based browsers and Firefox. We don't have support for Safari just yet, but you can start using it in Selenium 4 now, and we would love to start getting your feedback on that. And with that, I will go and see if we have any questions. Thank you.
Hey, David, you can check the questions in the Q&A. I hope you're there.
Yeah.
Great. Audience, if you have any questions, you can shout out to David in the Q&A.
Yeah, so I can only see one question. And so the question is, I'm having an issue that you mentioned with a little pop-up for login, and it's stopping me from moving forward. So this is the use case that I was talking about earlier with basic authentication. If you use Selenium 4, you can get around that. I think I recently put some documentation up on selenium.dev, which is the Selenium documentation website, under the, I think it's BiDi. But if you go have a look on there, you should be able to start using that now if you've got Selenium 4 to get around it, because it's a common problem that people have nowadays, because setting up servers can be quite hard. Is there any documentation about what you're going to adopt from other tools like Puppeteer? Yes, there is. And so if on the Selenium project lives on GitHub, so on github.com/seleniumhq/selenium. If you look in the projects section, there's a issue, I forget the name of it, where we're working through some of the use cases, and a lot of that is coming from like what we see from Puppeteer. And so that we can kind of improve things that way. So if you have a look on the Selenium issue tracker, you will definitely be doing it. I will kind of, I'll see about tweeting a link to it later so that you can have a look. There are so many frameworks out there. How do you compare Selenium WebDriver amongst them? Any drawbacks and challenges? There are a lot of frameworks, and so kind of the ones that build on top of Selenium, they kind of do what we've always wanted. That was how Selenium was always designed, is that we give you the underlying stuff and people can build out the frameworks. I tend to just pick the one that fits my need as I need it. So I try to be language agnostic until kind of I know what I need to do, and that we need to just pick things. I don't like every framework has got its challenge. The main thing that for me is don't try use Selenium to kind of test your database. Use the right tool for the right thing and just go from there. It seems to have been good conversations with the likes of the Puppeteer developers. Yes, there have. The Puppeteer developers are very open to collaboration. Unfortunately, every time we've tried to speak with the Playwright developers, they've got their own belief system, and they kind of go and do what they want to do, which is totally fine on them. We're trying to be as collaborative as possible. It doesn't always come across that way when kind of we get it back from other people. But they Playwright also is not part of the because Playwright is developed by Microsoft. Playwright is not part of the Edge ecosystem within Microsoft. They're part of the VS Code ecosystem, and so they don't interact that much, unfortunately, which is a slight drawback to them. So the questions are jumping up and down. So I'm just trying to read. I start reading one and then it moves around. Yeah. So I think this one I can kind of answer. Have you looked at other frameworks than Selenium and look what they offer? I think it was a UI question, and there's a very similar question around Cypress. I think kind of it all depends on what people want and how they want to develop stuff. And so like Cypress has this very specific use case. Cypress has a lot of limitations in that it works in the same way that Selenium RC works, which is the original Selenium from like 15 years ago. But it has a nice UI that people seem to like, but then kind of you couldn't do very specific JavaScripty things. So like if you have secure logins, it doesn't do trusted events. So kind of a trusted event is one that the operating system sends to the browser, and Selenium can do that too, because we work within the browser. Cypress works outside. So kind of the BiDi stuff is going to still give you all of that stuff and improve things. And so Cypress may choose to use that in the future. But when it comes to like UI stuff, truthfully, we've not had many requests for it. However, if there are a lot of requests, like we're always open to kind of hearing what people want. And I did a survey for Selenium at the end of last year. I'll be doing one hopefully within the next few months to kind of keep it going. I want to see how people are changing, and we'll be how people want to improve things. Any ideas on a released version of Selenium 4 rather than the beta? No, but we're kind of hopefully now that we're in the beta stages, we'll be going quite quickly. I still recommend people use the beta version because there are improvements to the code base, and it should just work. Like even though it's a major version number, it's not a breaking change. It's been designed that you can kind of just drop it in and start working. Is there a timeline for a stable WebDriver BiDi release? Unfortunately not. I think it's going to be API by API, and I think we just need, like, that is one side that we can't drive very fast because it's getting multiple browser vendors involved. So yeah, But I think that is all my questions.